There is a photograph that people have half remembered for 20 years without knowing where it came from. A 13-foot Burmese python floating in a Florida swamp, split open along its length. Sticking out of the rupture is the tail end of a 6-foot American alligator. The snake had swallowed it, and then something went wrong. Park biologists found them like that in 2005, and nobody has ever fully explained which one killed the other, or whether they killed each other. What the photograph did explain, instantly, is that something had arrived in the Everglades that the Everglades had no answer for. There are roads in this park where scientists used to count raccoons every night, and now they count nothing at all. We are going to that road at the end. Subscribe to DocWild 4K and turn on the bell. Every week we go somewhere most cameras never reach. Tell us in the comments what country or state you are watching from. Now let's go in, because before the snakes, this place was already one of the strangest ecosystems on Earth. There is a bird here that eats exactly one thing and would starve beside a river full of food. There is a cat here that came within a dozen animals of blinking out entirely and was saved by an act that biologists still argue about. And this whole landscape, every acre of it, is a river. 60 miles wide, moving so slowly that you cannot see it move at all. Start with the alligator because everything here is downstream of what it does. The American alligator can exceed 4 meters and 400 kilograms, and Florida holds something on the order of 1.5 million of them. It has been in this water essentially unchanged for millions of years, and by the 1960s, hunting had pushed it close to disappearing. Federal protection reversed that so completely that it is now one of the most cited recoveries in American conservation history. What matters here is not its size. It is what it digs. In the dry season, when the water drops and most of the Everglades becomes damp grass and cracked mud, alligators excavate depressions in the limestone and peat, using their snouts, feet, and tails to clear out material and deepen a hole until it holds water when everything around it does not. These are called gator holes, and they can be the only standing water for a considerable distance, and everything comes to them. Fish concentrate in them and survive the dry months there. Turtles, frogs, snakes, and invertebrates shelter in them. Wading birds hunt the fish trapped inside. Deer and raccoons drink from them. When the rains return, the animals that survived in those holes repopulate the surrounding marsh. An alligator digs a pond for its own convenience, and an entire dry season for hundreds of species depends on the result. It also eats a fraction of what shows up. That is the arrangement. And in the salt water at the southern edge, there is a second crocodilian that should not be sharing this place at all. The American crocodile lives in Florida Bay, and the mangrove estuaries, narrower snout, paler, and unlike the alligator, it tolerates salt water because it has glands on its tongue that excrete excess salt. Southern Florida is the only place on Earth where alligators and crocodiles occur together in the wild. Everywhere else on the planet, one or the other. Here the ranges overlap in a narrow band where fresh water from the interior meets the sea, and both animals are present in the same water. The Florida crocodile population fell to a few hundred animals by the mid-1970s. Protection and the accidental creation of warm water canals, including cooling channels at a power plant that turned into some of the most productive crocodile nesting habitat in the state, brought it back to a few thousand. It is also, unlike its Nile and saltwater relatives, notably shy. Attacks on people in Florida are close to non-existent. That salt water at the southern end has 2 mammals in it, and one of them hunts in a way that was only properly documented here. The West Indian manatee reaches over 3 meters and 400 kilograms, and it eats nothing but plants, seagrass, algae, and floating vegetation, up to 1/10 of its body weight a day. It has no natural predators in Florida. What it has instead is cold and boats. Manatees cannot tolerate water below about 20 degrees for long, and in winter they crowd into warm water refuges including the outflows of power plants. And because they feed just below the surface in shallow water, propeller strikes are so common that researchers identify individual animals by the scar patterns on their backs. Their molars solve a problem that comes from eating abrasive vegetation. New teeth form at the back of the jaw and migrate forward through it across the animal's life, replacing worn ones at the front, a conveyor belt of teeth, which almost no other mammal has. And in the shallow flats of Florida Bay, bottlenose dolphins do something extraordinary. A single dolphin swims a tight circle around a school of fish while beating its tail against the soft bottom, throwing up a ring of suspended mud. The fish will not cross that wall of sediment. The ring closes, the school compresses inside it, and the fish do the one thing that seems safe. They jump. Waiting outside the ring, facing inward, are the rest of the group, mouths open above the surface, catching them in the air. It is called mud ring feeding, and it requires one animal to create the trap while the others hold position at the correct point on its outside. It is documented in only a small number of places in the world, and Florida Bay is one of them. Now, the thing about this landscape that nobody believes the first time they hear it. The Everglades is not a swamp. It is a river. Rain falls in central Florida and collects in Lake Okeechobee, and historically that lake overflowed its southern rim, and the water simply kept going, spreading into a sheet up to 60 miles wide and often only a few inches deep, moving south across the entire lower peninsula toward the sea. It moves at something in the order of 1/4 of a mile per day. You cannot perceive it. Stand in it, and it is a flooded grassland. Measure it over a month, and it is a river with a current. The writer Marjorie Stoneman Douglas called it the River of Grass in 1947, and that phrase is what finally changed how Americans understood the place, because up to that point, the national project had been to drain it. The grass is sawgrass, which is a sedge with serrated edges sharp enough to cut skin, and it grows in enormous unbroken stands. The whole thing sits on limestone, which is porous, so the water is also moving underground through the rock, and the elevation change across 100 kilometers of it is a matter of a few meters. That flatness is what allows a river to be 60 miles wide. Rising out of the sawgrass are tree islands, hardwood hammocks a few feet higher than everything around them, dense with mahogany and gumbo limbo and strangler fig. A few feet of elevation in this landscape is the difference between marsh and forest, and those islands are where the land mammals live. And where the fresh water finally reaches salt, the mangroves take over. Red mangroves standing on stilted roots, building the coastline, sheltering the nurseries where an enormous fraction of Florida's fish begin life. Before the birds, the animals, everything else is actually eating. The Everglades runs on crayfish and on a fish barely 5 centimeters long. Mosquito fish, sunfish, killifish, and freshwater crayfish fill the flooded sawgrass in enormous numbers during the wet season. And when the marsh dries down, they are pushed into the shrinking pools where every wading bird in South Florida is waiting. That concentration is the entire basis of the food web here, and it only happens because the water leaves. 2 fish in that water solved the oxygen problem the way animals do in the tropics. The Florida gaur is long, armored in hard interlocking scales, and it gulps air at the surface using a swim bladder that works as a lung. Warm, shallow water holds very little dissolved oxygen, and in the worst of the dry season, most fish suffocate. The gaur does not, because it is not depending on the water to breathe. It hangs motionless near the surface, looking like a stick, and takes small fish with a sideways snap of a long tooth-lined jaw. The bowfin does the same thing and is even older, a lineage that has been essentially unchanged for well over 100 million years. It can survive in water so stagnant that almost nothing else remains, and it guards its young, the male staying with a dense ball of hatchlings and defending them aggressively. Both of these fish are what an alligator eats when there is nothing larger available, and both are why a drying pool still holds something worth hunting. Which brings us to the birds, because the Everglades was once one of the great bird spectacles on the planet. Historic accounts describe wading bird colonies in the hundreds of thousands, a sky over the southern Everglades that people compared to smoke. Wood storks, herons, egrets, ibises, spoonbills, all nesting in the same rookeries, all feeding on fish concentrated by the annual drying. Those populations are down by roughly 90% from historic levels, not because of the snakes, because of the water. The wading birds here do not simply need water. They need it to leave on schedule. Their entire breeding strategy is timed to the dry down. As the marsh shrinks, fish concentrate into pools at densities that make it possible to feed a nest full of chicks. Nesting begins in anticipation of that concentration. When drainage and water management altered when and how the Everglades dries, that timing broke. Birds nested, and the food did not arrive in the density their chicks required. The roseate spoonbill is the one people photograph. Pink, with a flattened spatulate bill, it sweeps side to side through shallow water, snapping shut on contact when it touches prey. It hunts by feel, which means it can hunt in water too muddy to see through, and its pink comes from carotenoids in the crustaceans it eats. The anhinga is the one that looks broken. It swims with its entire body submerged and only its long neck and head above the surface, which is why it is called the snake bird. Its feathers are not waterproof, deliberately. Waterlogged plumage reduces buoyancy and lets it hunt underwater with far less effort than a duck would need. It spears fish with a sharp bill, surfaces, flips them into the air, and swallows them head first. And then it has to stand on a branch with its wings spread open for a long time, drying out because it cannot fly properly wet. And there is one here that eats a single food and nothing else. The snail kite is a medium-sized raptor with a bill that curves in a deep hook, and it is a specialist to a degree that borders on reckless. Its diet is apple snails. Not mostly, essentially entirely. The bill shape is a tool for one job: extracting a snail from its shell without breaking it. It flies low over the marsh, spots a snail near the surface, takes it in one foot, carries it to a perch, and works the body out with that hook, which makes it completely hostage to water levels. Apple snails need the marsh wet in specific ways at specific times to breed. When water management drops levels at the wrong moment, snail populations crash, and the kite has no fallback whatsoever. Its United States population has been down into the hundreds of pairs. Then something unexpected happened. An introduced South American apple snail, larger than the native one, spread through parts of Florida. It is an invasive species, and for a specialist that was starving, it turned out to be food. Young kites struggled with the size of the new snails at first. Over subsequent generations, researchers documented measurable increases in bill and body size in the population. An invasive species accidentally rescued a native one, and evolution responded fast enough to watch. And the snail kite is not the only specialist on that snail. The limpkin is a brown wading bird with white streaking long legs and a bill that is slightly decurved and, this is the detail, twisted at the tip, to the right, in a way that matches the internal curve of an apple snail's shell. It inserts the bill, cuts the muscle, and extracts the body without breaking the shell. Piles of empty, intact shells around a feeding site are the signature of a limpkin, not of a predator that crushes. Its call is one of the strangest sounds in North America, a loud, harsh, drawn-out wail, delivered mostly at night, which is why it turns up in old Florida folklore and why film sound editors have used it for decades whenever a jungle needed to sound haunted. For a long time, the limpkin was uncommon in Florida and confined to the areas where native apple snails persisted. Then the introduced South American apple snail spread, and the limpkin followed it. Its range has expanded substantially in recent years, well beyond where it used to be found. Two specialists, the same food, and the same invasive snail changing both of their futures in the same direction. Quick pause, because what comes next is where this story turns, including the road I promised you at the start, where researchers went out to count animals and found almost nothing. If this is holding you, subscribe to Doc Wild 4K right now. We go somewhere most cameras never reach every week, and subscribers always see the new ones first. Turn on the bell so you do not miss it. Let's keep going. There is one more native predator here, and it nearly ended. The Florida panther is a cougar, the same species that ranges from Canada to Patagonia. But this population is the last breeding cougar population east of the Mississippi River. Everything else was killed off across the eastern United States over about 2 centuries. By the early 1990s, there were somewhere around 20 to 30 adults left in South Florida, and they were in trouble beyond simple numbers. Isolated for generations, the population had inbred to the point of visible defects, kinked tails, heart malformations, and reproductive failure in males. The genetics were collapsing on themselves. So in 1995, wildlife managers did something that remains debated. They brought in 8 female cougars from Texas, the nearest surviving population and historically the neighboring one, and released them into South Florida. It worked. The offspring were healthier, kitten survival improved, and the population climbed to somewhere between 1 and 200 adults today, depending on the estimate. The argument is whether the result is still a Florida panther. Some hold that the subspecies was diluted. Others hold that connectivity between neighboring populations is exactly what would have happened naturally if humans had not severed it, and that all the intervention did was restore a link. Either way, the animal is alive, and it would not be otherwise. Its remaining problem is space. Panthers need enormous territory, males covering hundreds of square kilometers, and South Florida is one of the most rapidly developed landscapes in the United States. The leading documented cause of panther death is being hit by cars. And now the animal that changed everything. The Burmese python is native to Southeast Asia. It reaches 5 meters and beyond. It is a constrictor, and it is an ambush predator that spends most of its life motionless and invisible. It arrived in Florida through the pet trade. Large snakes were imported in enormous numbers through the 1980s and 1990s, and some were released or escaped when they grew past what their owners could handle. A hurricane in 1992 destroyed facilities holding reptiles, which likely contributed as well. By the early 2000s, they were breeding in the wild. South Florida is close to a perfect match for them. Subtropical, wet, warm year-round, full of prey with no evolutionary experience of a giant constricting snake. Nothing here recognized it as a threat, and nothing here was equipped to control it. Nobody knows how many there are. Estimates range from tens of thousands to hundreds of thousands, and the honest answer from researchers is that they cannot count them, because the animal is nearly impossible to find. That is the part that is hard to convey. A 5-meter snake in sawgrass is invisible. Trained searchers walking directly toward a python whose location is known from a radio transmitter routinely fail to see it from a few meters away. Detection rates in field studies are extremely low. The population estimate is uncertain by an order of magnitude for the simple reason that we cannot see them. They eat almost anything of the right size. Documented stomach contents include raccoons, opossums, rabbits, deer, bobcats, wading birds of many species, and alligators. Full-grown white-tailed deer have been recovered from pythons in the Everglades. So have alligators approaching 2 meters, and the females lay large clutches, commonly dozens of eggs, and guard them by coiling around the nest and shivering to generate heat. There is a native snake here that eats other snakes, and it is the one animal in Florida that was already doing the python's job. The eastern indigo snake is the longest native snake in the United States, over 2.5 meters, glossy blue-black, non-venomous, and it is a generalist predator with a specialty. It eats rattlesnakes. It is largely immune to their venom, and it kills by seizing the head and simply chewing through it rather than constricting. It also eats young pythons, which sounds like a solution until you look at the numbers. The indigo is federally threatened. It needs large connected tracts of habitat, and there are nowhere near enough of them to matter against an invasion this size. It depends heavily on gopher-tortoise burrows for shelter, and those are disappearing with development. The one native animal equipped to fight back is itself in trouble. And the python is not the only thing that arrived. The Argentine black and white tegu is a lizard reaching 1.5 meters, and it is now established across parts of South Florida with a breeding population that is spreading. Unlike the python, it is out in daylight, it is common in disturbed habitat and agricultural edges, and it does the thing that does the most damage in a place like this. It eats eggs. Tegus raid the nests of ground-nesting birds, turtles, and, documented repeatedly, alligators and American crocodiles. In a landscape where the crocodile population is only a few thousand animals and every nest counts, an abundant, adaptable, daytime egg predator with no local history is a specific and serious problem. The python removed the mammals. The tegu is working on the next generation of everything that lays in the ground. Now, the road. Along the main routes through Everglades National Park, researchers ran systematic night surveys, driving the same roads and counting the mammals they saw. Those counts had been done for years, so there was a baseline going back to a period before the snakes were established. Then they ran them again after. Raccoon sightings had fallen by around 99%, opossums by roughly the same, bobcats down by close to 90%, and marsh rabbits, cottontail rabbits and foxes, animals that had been ordinary on those roads, were not recorded at all in the areas where pythons had been established longest. The steepest declines lined up geographically with where the snakes had been present the longest, and the areas outside python range still had normal mammal numbers. That is what a road with nothing on it means. Not that the animals moved, that a medium-sized mammal community across a large section of a national park was consumed, and the effects keep going outward. Fewer raccoons and opossums means fewer nest predators, which changes bird and turtle nesting. Fewer mammals means the mosquitoes that fed on them shifted to other hosts, which changes disease dynamics. Bobcats and panthers lost prey. Pythons and alligators now compete directly, and pythons have taken alligators while alligators have taken pythons. An entire food web is being rewritten by one species in real time inside a protected national park, and it is one of the best documented ecological invasions in history precisely because it is happening in a place with scientists already stationed in it. So what is anyone doing about it? Everything available, and none of it works cleanly. There is a paid contractor program. There is an annual public hunting event that draws thousands of people. There are trained detector dogs. There are traps. And there is a great deal of walking around at night with flashlights. Thousands of pythons have been removed. Against a population that may be in the hundreds of thousands, in terrain where they are invisible, in an area the size of a small country. Nobody involved believes eradication is possible. The stated goal is containment, stopping the northward spread. And the most effective technique in the entire toolkit is the one I brought you here for. It is called the Scout Snake Program, and it works by using the animal against itself. Researchers capture adult male pythons, implant radio transmitters, and release them exactly where they were found. Male pythons during breeding season do one thing extremely well. They find females. They track them across the landscape by scent over long distances through terrain where no human can see anything at all. So the researchers wait and then follow the signal. The male leads them to a female. And adult females are the whole point because a single large female can carry dozens of eggs, and removing her removes an entire generation. Breeding aggregations get found this way too. Several males gathered around one female, all in one place. The female is removed, The male is left in the field, still carrying his transmitter, and goes off to find the next one. One of these scout snakes has been credited with leading to the removal of a very large number of pythons over several seasons of work. The invader is doing the searching. It is the only method that solves the detection problem, because it is the only searcher in the system that is actually good at finding pythons. Here is what I want to leave you with. We usually tell invasion stories as a fight. Something arrives and something native pushes back and one of them wins. That is not what happened here, and that is what makes the Everglades so unsettling. There was no fight. The raccoons did not lose a war with the pythons. They simply had no framework for an ambush predator of that size in that habitat, because nothing like it had existed in North America in their entire evolutionary history. They kept behaving exactly as they always had, and were removed from the landscape in about a decade. That is the actual lesson of this place. Not that the python is powerful, it is powerful, but plenty of native predators are. It is that the native animals had no experience to draw on, and experience is the only thing that had ever protected them. The Everglades survived being drained, being burned, being cut in half by canals and highways, and losing 90% of its birds. It is now being reassembled by the largest ecosystem restoration project ever attempted anywhere in the world. And the thing that may change it most permanently arrived in a shipping crate. Tell me in the comments which of these stayed with you. The alligator that digs the pond an entire dry season depends on. The bird that eats one food and nothing else. The panther that was saved by 8 cats from Texas. Or the road where scientists went out to count raccoons and found none. Leave a like if this journey was worth your time, subscribe if you have not already, and share this with someone who thinks nothing wild is left in the United States. Until the next one, go somewhere wild. Doc Wild 4K.